In reflecting on what I might contribute to a spoken archive on Charles Ives, I kept coming back to the idea that Ives composed music that no one else could have imagined, because no one else heard the world the way Ives did, with a kind of granular, focused attention and the most remarkable panoramic aural vision that he possessed. And his music is both familiar and comforting, and it is unsettling, and it is unfamiliar, and it can be upsetting. But it is always more than the notes on the page or the sounds in the air. And Ives knew this when he said, "What music sounds like might not be what it is." He invites us, he invited me to engage more deeply, to get beyond the surface of the sounds and to get at that is. And this is true whether the piece is a 60-second song or a 45-minute sonata. I'm always being made to go bigger, to go deeper, to go larger, and I am enlarged. And it moves me and it's moved listeners to go to places different from where they entered in. I first encountered Ives's music at a NYSMA festival, a New York State School Music Association high school festival, when Greg Smith was hired to conduct this high school honors chorus. And he chose Psalm 67, a not easy piece for a professional chorus. But he was such a proselytizer for American music and for Charles Ives's music that he brought this gift to us. The piece opens with a full chorus singing homophonically, men in G minor and women in C major, at a mezzo forte dynamic level, in a reverent andante maestoso tempo, this chord. And the words were, "God, be merciful unto us, and bless us, and cause his face to shine upon us." It's a loose A-B-A form, and the B section is a very brief fugal section which exhorts the nations to be glad and sing for joy. And then we come back to an A section. And the A section returns to that homophonic polytonal sound that we heard at the beginning. But now the chorus chants on that polytonal chord, "God shall bless us, and all the ends of the earth shall fear him." Greg Smith was very careful to arrange the chorus in such a way that we could hold this bitonal world. And so he allowed us to practice with the piano the first time. And then he took the piano away. He said, "No, I want you to listen to each other." And so we listened, and he walked around listening to us. And as he listened, he identified that some of us had perfect pitch. And he wanted to place us strategically to hold this world in place. And I was here between the end of the altos, the beginning of the tenors, the side of the basses, and the back side of the sopranos. And my job was to sing that C on that chord and hold that ground and sing C major, while the world around me was singing G minor. I was also floating, seemingly unmoored, in a dilating, shimmering, harmonic space that was so much larger than the notes on the page that we had rehearsed. Nothing in my experience prior to had prepared me for this experience. No singing in my Lutheran church choir or my high school chorus, no playing of the traditional piano repertoire that I had been taught, Nothing prepared me for that magnificently unsettling and epiphanic moment. When I sang the word God on that opening dotted half note that Ives had assigned to it, I felt the sound open up what I could only imagine was eternity. And I reveled in the pure physical sensation of that sound and the sense of harmonic and temporal freedom that it unleashed, a kind of endless, pulsating sound. But I also fretted that my God of Bach chorales and well-behaved Lutheran hymns was so much smaller than Ives's God. And for a very religious 15-year-old, that was deeply unsettling. With all the hubris that only a teenager can possess, I thought I had God figured out. But Ives suggested maybe not. His music led me somewhere other than where I had started, and it's no exaggeration to say that that one moment set me on a trajectory that I have followed for the last 5 decades. 2 decades later, after bachelor's and master's degrees in piano and music history, I went back for my PhD in musicology. At my interview, I was told that the program would introduce me to so many things that I might want to pursue. But I assured people I knew what I wanted to study. I had to study Ives's creation of that expansive harmonic space. And I found a preponderance of occurrences in pieces that referred to place, which I then dubbed Ives's place pieces. And so I wrote a dissertation, Reconciliations, Time, Space, and the American Place in the Music of Charles Ives. I've continued to be intrigued by Ives's focus on places that he knew well because I know many of the same places well, too. I was born in the city, but my mother's family had relatives, roots, in Ridgefield, Connecticut, 8 miles away from Danbury. There's something about the music of this Connecticut-born New Yorker that resonates with me. Perhaps it's one reason that the piece Central Park in the Dark caught my ear and my attention. It's a place I know, or I thought I did until Ives opened me up to other ways of thinking about it. Central Park in the Dark captures the sound world a visitor might encounter while sitting on a park bench on a summer evening in the first decade of the 20th century in the park. As listeners, we are inside this idyllic, wholly constructed green space that Ives musicalizes with a 10-measure ostinato that is palindromic. It folds back on itself. And then it loops around, connecting the ending of the piece to the beginning of the piece, perhaps suggesting the permanence of place and our transience as we move through it. But Ives also includes a human presence in the sounds of Central Park, and they come from outside the park's boundaries. We hear tunes from a nearby pub. We hear Hello My Baby. We hear Sousa's Washington Post March. And we hear street sounds. We hear the drama of a horse and cart getting away from its driver and smashing into a fence on a nearby street. He captures it all. The park becomes like a giant mixing board where inside and outside come together and blend, where the once elite park can't keep out everyday sounds, and it never could. The park's soundscape is bigger than we imagined. I returned to Central Park in the Dark in 2005 when the installation artists, Christo and Jean-Claude, turned Central Park into the site of The Gates, a site-specific artwork consisting of 7,500 billowing saffron flags that lined 23 miles of sidewalks that wove through the park. Like Ives's piece had done 100 years earlier, the gates invited people in. There was a river of people flowing in all directions following the flags. Both works democratized what is often a contested public place. Ives enlarged the place, and by extension he enlarged us with music that doesn't distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable sounds. The humming and buzzing of Central Park's nature is not separate from the all-too-obvious human culture. Everything comes together in Ives's very public sound world. A decade later, Ives musicalized another public place and time when he wrote From Hanover Square North, at the end of a tragic day, the voice of the people again arose. In an extensive programmatic comment, Ives explained that the piece commemorated what occurred at an elevated train station in 1915, the day that citizens learned of the sinking of the Lusitania and the deaths of 128 American passengers on board. He references the many different kinds of people who were at the station when the news broke by noting their clothing and what they were carrying. And he talks of the power of music to bring them all together. Ives notes that upon hearing the sounds of an organ grinder wafting up from the street below, people joined in with what he was playing. And Ives points out that it wasn't an operatic aria, and it wasn't a popular tune of the day, but rather it was a simple gospel hymn, In the Sweet By and By. Over the course of the piece, listeners hear increasingly long snippets of the rhythmic and melodic motives that characterize the tune, coming from different instruments, as if from different people on the station platform. Bit by bit, Ives gathers up the tune until the orchestra comes together in a majestic, proud, rhythmically synchronized, polytonal statement of the song, the most complete we'll hear before the sounds of the train heading out of the city take the song away with it. As with Psalm 67, From Hanover Square North doesn't impose a single, neat tonality to make its point. In fact, its point is made more powerful by Ives's recognition and embrace of the diverse points of view and the problematic nature of that cultural moment in his polyphonic mashup. Like Ives's God in Psalm 67, the message of Hanover Square requires something more than can be contained in a single key. And I believe that it's Ives's inclination and goal to respect and even emphasize the multivalence of humans' lived experiences that make his music so vitally important and meaningful and powerful and perhaps useful to Ives scholars today. In October 2021, Dr. Mark Sciucchetti and I presented a paper at the Ives Symposium celebrating the centennial of Ives's Second Piano Sonata, Concord, Massachusetts, 1840 to 1860. It was organized by Andrew Grenade and David Thurmeyer. We titled our paper, Revisiting Concord, the Place, the Time, and the Piece. Mark is a musicologist and a cultural geographer with particular expertise in GIS, Geographic Information Systems, a data organizing system that collects material and information and imposes it on maps. He's especially interested in historical maps, and as a New Englander, historic maps of that region of the country are particularly important to him. It was 24 years since I had first presented or published on the Concord Sonata, and lots had changed in that quarter century. Those changes caused me to rethink what the sonata might have to say to a 21st century listener. We focused our attention on the fourth movement, Thoreau, because it presented what I believed was the greatest opportunity to argue for the relevance of Ives's music in an age of Black Lives Matter, when the nation was still reeling from the unprovoked murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and 162 other unarmed Black people in just the first 8 months of 2020. We asked conference attendees, all white, with one exception, a young Black man sitting at the back of the hall, why come together in 2021 to explore a piece written 100 years ago, whose title points to a time 80 years before that? Beyond a group of Ivesians, to whom does the work speak? For whom does it speak? What history has Ives's sonata celebrated? Perhaps most baitingly, we asked, do we really need one more celebration of a dead white male or his works, especially those of a rich Ivy League-trained businessman? Might it be more prudent to cancel Ives, or at least the symposium, to avoid any unpleasantness? We answered no, we have to keep listening to Ives. Using 24 maps and charts, Mark and I laid out the less well-known history of Concord, the one that goes beyond the shot heard round the world, to call attention to the deep history of slave holding in that town. We built on the work of Elise Lemire, a literature professor at SUNY Purchase, who in 2009 had written the book Black Walden, Slavery and Its Aftermath in Concord. In it, she laid out the history of the place so closely associated with Thoreau and sanctified by modern-day environmentalists who regularly make pilgrimages to the site. Lemire pointed out that before Walden was a green space, Walden was a black space. Because of the poor soil, the woods and the pond location were unable to grow the food necessary for healthy living. And so it was the place, along with 2 other swampy regions on the outskirts of Concord, where the formerly enslaved and the Irish were allowed to live. It was where Emerson owned acreage to harvest wood, where he bought up future railroad easements, and where he allowed Thoreau to squat during his sojourn there. Mark and I connected Ives to Thoreau and Ives's close reading of Walden. We focused on Thoreau's naming Brister Freeman, Zilpha White, and Cato Ingram, 3 formerly enslaved people, in his chapter titled Former Inhabitants and Winter Visitors. Here, Thoreau also named a more recent inhabitant, the white outcast Irishman, Hugh Quoyle. Thoreau would build his own cabin from the disassembled shanty owned by Quoyle. Using a map from 1830, Mark showed the precise places of the homes of these named outcasts. It was important to us to make them visible, to place them in Thoreau's world and in relation to the famed transcendentalists, given their subsequent erasure from all but a very few histories of the town. In 1852, shortly after Thoreau left Walden, there were no traces of these people in existing maps. They didn't exist. The woods appear to have been devoid of civilization forever. By 1875, Walden Pond and Walden Woods don't even appear on the Concord map. The 19th century equivalent of gentrification had come to Concord. Given the date of the symposium and the events that had transpired in 2020, we chose the Thoreau movement because essential to Ives's music is his quotation of Stephen Foster's 1852 dialect-ridden plantation song, Masses in the Cold Ground. Starting around 3.5 minutes into the movement, Ives introduces the opening of the chorus over a soft, trudging ostinato that spans a rising seventh. And then he references the tune twice more in close succession in the final moments of the piece. At this cultural moment, few composers of any race are well served by calling attention to their use of Stephen Foster's music, especially tunes whose words include ruptured English or derogatory terms to reference people of color. But rather than ignore the problem or avoid the discomfort or hope that no one knows the words, my inclination is to walk toward the problem, to welcome it, to sit with it, and to recognize the opportunity Ives's music provides for conversation about forgotten histories, convenient erasures, pervasive attitudes that diminish and demean, and all the shadow narratives that haven't been told. To use his music as a springboard into the problem. Ives scholars have connected his use of the tune to Foster's mention of cornfields, to Thoreau's references to himself as growing like corn in the night, and to Ives's notes for the movement, and all of this is solid and good and true. Mark and I suggested another possibility, that Ives may have used the tune to make an additional association, to acknowledge the presence of the formerly enslaved in one of the few places that was available for them to live in Concord, in Walden Woods, the place where Thoreau went to build his cabin to get away from civilization, the place so closely associated with Thoreau and exclusively associated with Thoreau. The Concord Sonata, like all of Ives's music, will accumulate new readings, new meanings over time, and some of them will be less generous or flattering than others. But I believe that his music can stand up to scrutiny and will always contain the potential to engage and to enlarge us by unsettling us from our all too comfortable easy chairs and cause us to rethink what we thought we knew.